Okay, so welcome to another deep dive with us. And today we are looking at the Gaza ceasefire talks.
Right.
So, as you probably remember, a temporary ceasefire went into effect on March 1st between Israel and Hamas.
Yeah.
And now everyone's kind of waiting with bated breath to see if it'll become more permanent.
Well, I feel a lot of anticipation.
And to help us kind of dig into this a bit, we have some really great reporting from the BBC.
Some solid reporting for sure.
Yeah, they always do a good job. So
Yeah.
the big question, I guess, is will we see a deal? Will they actually strike a deal? Or are we headed right back into conflict? So let's find out.
Yeah, let's get into it. You know what's really interesting about this whole situation is that it seemed like both sides, at least initially came to the table with a good amount of hope.
Yeah.
Like they were ready to try to make something work. And the U.S. even put forward a proposal to extend the ceasefire all the way to mid-April. So that's, significant.
Yeah, absolutely. And there was even talk about a pretty major hostage exchange. Can you remind us what the specifics were on that?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So the proposal involved a swap. They were going to swap 11 living Israeli hostages and the bodies of half of the deceased hostages that Hamas is currently holding. And in return, Israel would release a number of Palestinian prisoners.
Okay.
I mean, just think about that for a second. Think about what that would mean for the families involved on both sides. Years of just waiting and not knowing.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And the uncertainty just hanging over them. It would be huge. And beyond that, it also sends a message to the international community, right?
Yeah.
Like a signal that both sides might be ready to really, take a chance on peace.
Yeah, it definitely felt like there was some real momentum building there for a while.
It did.
But then things seemed to kind of take a turn. We heard from a Palestinian official speaking anonymously to the BBC that the talks had actually failed to reach an agreement. So what happened there?
Well, it's really important to keep in mind that negotiations like this are incredibly complex.
Yeah, there are so many moving pieces, so many different perspectives. Each side comes in with its own, list of demands.
Yeah.
And there are always red lines, things they just won't budge on.
Right.
And based on, what we've seen in past negotiations, it seems likely that some pretty fundamental disagreements popped up, probably relating to, the terms of the hostage exchange and the bigger question of a long-term solution.
I see. So even with this, potential breakthrough,
Yeah.
with the hostage exchange on the table, things still hit a wall.
Yeah, it seems that way, at least for the time being. But there's another interesting wrinkle here. Israel has publicly stated that they're still open to dialogue.
That's interesting. If the talks have really stalled, why would they come out and say that? Is that is there something else going on behind the scenes there?
Oh, absolutely. In diplomacy, there's always a lot happening behind closed doors. What we see publicly doesn't always reflect the full reality.
Right.
So it's possible that Israel's statement is strategic.
Yeah.
It's what we call posturing.
Posturing. Okay. Think of it like a chess game. They're trying to send signals.
Okay.
Maybe reassure their own public, maybe put pressure on Hamas, maybe even influence international opinion. It's all part of the game.
So it's not necessarily that they have a different understanding of whether or not the talks have failed.
Yeah.
But they're just being very strategic in how they communicate about it.
Exactly. It's all about framing the narrative. And remember, the situation is constantly changing. It's fluid, so it's totally possible they still see a path forward, even with these obstacles in the way.
Okay. And to make things even more complicated, the White House has weighed in, and they've accused Hamas of making some pretty impractical demands. Given what we know about this whole situation, what could those demands actually be?
Well, it's tough to say for sure without more information, but if we look at Hamas history, their track record and their long-term objectives, it's likely that these demands touch on some of the most sensitive points in this conflict. We could be talking about things like easing the economic sanctions on Gaza, giving them more control over their borders and releasing specific prisoners who were seen as symbols of resistance, those kinds of things.
So these aren't just, bargaining chips. They represent core issues that are fundamental to the conflict itself.
They get to the heart of what this conflict is really about. Control, freedom of movement recognition,
Yeah.
These are deep-rooted issues. And understanding these demands, I think, really helps you grasp why reaching a lasting agreement is so incredibly challenging.
It really makes you wonder what's going to happen next. The longer this drags on, it seems like that underlying tension is going to keep building.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. The delay is a double-edged sword.
Yeah.
On the one hand, it gives both sides time, more time to reconsider their positions, to maybe find some common ground. But on the other hand, every single day that passes without a resolution just increases the risk of that ceasefire collapsing, and we go right back to violence.
Right. So to kind of sum up where we are right now, we've got a negotiation that stalled disagreements on some pretty fundamental issues and just a ton of uncertainty about what the future holds.
Yeah, that's a good summary, and that actually leads me to a final thought for you all to consider.
Okay.
You know, in a situation like this, it's just so complex, so emotionally charged. How do you, as a listener, really cut through the noise and form your own informed opinion?
Yeah.
There's so many voices out there, so much information, and a lot of misinformation too, frankly, flying around. So what sources do you actually trust? How do you critically evaluate what you're hearing and reading?
Right.
That's the real challenge here, and I think it's the responsibility we all share in trying to understand this conflict.
Yeah, it's definitely something to think about.